You do it every single day. At job interviews, business meetings, even when you meet a stranger. But what if I told you the handshake started as a way to check if someone was hiding a weapon?
Okay, hold on. A weapon? Like a dagger up your sleeve? That's what you're telling me is the origin of the most common greeting in the world?
That's exactly it. Welcome to the Why Behind Everything, the podcast that peels back the layers of the everyday. Today we're diving deep into the surprisingly dramatic history of the handshake.
I'm already hooked. So where does this story start? Ancient Greece? Rome?
You're right on the money. We have to go back to at least the 5th century BC in ancient Greece. There are carvings and pottery from that era showing soldiers and gods shaking hands, but it wasn't a friendly hello.
Right, it was the weapon check.
Exactly. You extend your right hand, your weapon hand, to show it's empty. By grasping the other person's hand, you're both proving you're unarmed and preventing the other person from drawing a weapon. Some historians even suggest that the up and down shaking motion was designed to dislodge any small daggers hidden up the sleeve.
That is wild. So every time I shake someone's hand at a coffee shop, I'm subconsciously frisking them for a hidden blade.
In a way, yes, you're participating in a thousands-year-old ritual of peace and vulnerability. The Romans took it a step further.
How so?
They often preferred the forearm clasp. You'd grip the other person's forearm, not just their hand. It served the same purpose, checking for daggers up the sleeve, but it was also seen as a more substantial gesture of connection and mutual trust. It was common among soldiers.
Oh, I can totally picture that. It feels more like a warrior's greeting. And I guess that carried into the medieval era with knights, right? All that armor and chivalry. So it wasn't just practical, it was deeply symbolic. A warrior's grip that says, "My strength is joined with yours." Was this also used by regular citizens, or was it strictly a military thing?
While it was most common among soldiers and those in positions of power, the forearm clasp was also a gesture used in formal agreements and pledges between prominent citizens. It was a serious, binding gesture, not something you'd do casually. The regular Roman on the street was more likely to use a simple hand clasp, much like we do. But the forearm grip carried a heavier weight of commitment and honor. It did. For medieval knights, handshaking was a critical gesture. When you offer your hand, you have to remove your gauntlet, the metal glove. This was a significant sign of trust. You were literally disarming a piece of your armor, making yourself vulnerable to greet someone. It was a pledge of non-aggression sealed in a single action.
So it goes from, "I'm checking you for weapons," to, "I'm willingly making myself vulnerable to you." That's a huge evolution.
A massive one. But for a long time, it was mostly a gesture for specific context. Peace treaties, legal agreements, pledges. It wasn't your everyday greeting. That started to change as global trade picked up.
Money enters the picture.
Exactly. As merchants traveled along trade routes, they needed a universal way to seal a deal, a kind of non-verbal contract. The handshake was perfect. It was a bond. When you shake on it, you're echoing centuries of traders and merchants making a promise. This is how it started to spread from the battlefield and the king's court to the common marketplace.
Okay, that makes sense. It's becoming more and more part of everyday life. But I feel like there has to be a twist. Something must have happened to interrupt this.
Oh, a massive one. The plague. When the Black Death swept through Europe in the 14th century and in subsequent outbreaks, everything about human interaction changed. People became terrified of touching.
Of course, suddenly the hand you're shaking isn't just potentially holding a weapon, it's potentially holding a fatal disease.
Precisely. The handshake went into a long hibernation. For centuries, the preferred greeting, especially among the upper classes, became the bow, the curtsy, or the tipping of a hat. These were all gestures of respect done from a safe distance. The handshake was seen as crude, common, and dangerous.
So how did it ever come back if society moved on to bowing and tipping hats? What brought back the handshake?
This is maybe the most surprising part of the whole story. We can largely thank the Quakers.
Wait, really? The religious group? How did they get involved?
In the 17th and 18th centuries, the Quakers, or the Religious Society of Friends, had a core belief in equality. They believed that no person was better than another. And they saw gestures like bowing or curtsying as hierarchical. You bow down to a king or a lord. It acknowledges a social inferior and superior.
That makes sense.
So they rejected it entirely. Instead, they championed the handshake as a preferred greeting because it was a gesture between equals. Two people meeting at the same level, clasping hands in a simple, honest way. They used it with everyone from a farmer to a duke. It was a radical social statement.
That's incredible. So the handshake was reborn as a symbol of democracy and equality. It wasn't about weapons or plagues anymore.
Exactly. And as democratic ideals spread, especially in places like the United States, so did the handshake. By the 19th century, it had become the standard class-free greeting we know today. It was the perfect gesture for a society that, at least in theory, valued every individual equally.
Wow, that journey is it's so much more complex than I ever could have imagined. But it feels like history repeated itself recently.
It absolutely did. In early 2020, the handshake faced its greatest threat since the Black Death, the COVID-19 pandemic. Suddenly, just like in the 14th century, touching became taboo. Health officials around the world were explicitly telling people not to shake hands.
I remember that so clearly. The elbow bump, the awkward little wave. It felt like we were all trying to rewrite a social rule that was baked into our DNA.
And think about this. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the top infectious disease expert in the US, went on record saying, "I don't think we should ever shake hands ever again, to be honest with you."
Wait, really? He said ever again? That's basically declaring war on the handshake. It's a modern echo of the plague years where the gesture was seen as actively dangerous.
It is. For a while, it seemed like it might be the end. Pundits wrote articles titled "The Death of the Handshake." But as the pandemic has receded, what have we seen?
It's coming back. Slowly, maybe a bit more cautiously, but people are shaking hands again.
Which just goes to show how deeply ingrained this ritual is. It has survived wars, plagues, and massive societal shifts. It's a silent, powerful story told in one gesture. It contains our ancient fears of violence, our instincts for trust, our struggle for equality, and our fundamental need for human connection.
I will absolutely never think about it the same way again. It's not just a handshake, it's thousands of years of history.
So, to everyone listening, the next time you extend your hand to someone, think about that journey, from a weapon check on an ancient battlefield, to a radical statement of equality, to a gesture of trust that even a global pandemic couldn't erase. Will you think about it differently? But before we wrap up, there's one more layer to this that we can't ignore. The handshake around the world. We've talked about its history, but its modern practice is far from universal.
That's a great point. The handshake might feel universal, but its execution is definitely not one size fits all. I can't wait to hear about this.
For instance, in Japan, the traditional greeting is the bow. While handshakes are becoming more common in business, a bow is still a sign of deep respect. If you do shake hands, it's often gentle, not the firm, business-like grip favored in the West. A firm handshake there could be seen as aggressive.
That's a critical piece of cultural intelligence. So a powerful, firm handshake, which might signal confidence in the US or Germany, could come off as completely overbearing in another culture. What about other regions?
In many Middle Eastern cultures, a handshake can last much longer than in the West. It's a sign of warmth and hospitality. Pulling away too quickly can be interpreted as a slight. Also, it's traditional to use the right hand, as the left hand is reserved for personal hygiene. And in some Orthodox Jewish and Muslim communities, men and women do not shake hands with the opposite sex at all.
This is so important. It's a reminder that what we see as a simple, universal gesture is actually a complex social language. One wrong word in that language, like using the wrong hand or gripping too hard, can send a completely unintended message. What a story. Thank you all for tuning in to another episode of The Why Behind Everything.
Our pleasure.
Join us next time when we ask a question you see every single day. Why do prices almost always end in .99?
Ooh, that's a good one.
To make sure you don't miss it, be sure to subscribe to The Why Behind Everything wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, stay curious.